Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in a really fascinating and I think high-stakes stack of source material that puts law, science, and even philosophy into direct conflict.
It really does.
We're doing a deep dive into the conviction of a man named Dr. Chen Yuan, who is a brilliant physics PhD.
And not just any physicist. I mean, his specialty is maybe the most abstract corner of the field you can imagine.
Yeah.
Nonlinear complex systems theory.
Right.
And he found himself on the wrong side of the law, convicted in 2023 for picking quarrels and provoking trouble, the PQT crime, all of this stemming from forwarding some posts on a chat app.
And the sources we're looking at today are just incredible. We have the usual legal documents, the indictment, verdict, appeals, but they're set against these personal defense letters from Dr. Chen himself.
And they are truly unique.
He doesn't just argue the law.
Yeah.
He applies his scientific expertise to try and systematically demolish the prosecution's case.
Exactly. So our mission today is really to unpack this case, to understand how a pretty controversial law, which is usually for, actual brawls in the street, was applied to academic curiosity, to online expression.
We want to show you how a defense that's rooted in chaos theory and language philosophy became this flashpoint for discussing due process, free speech, and systemic power.
It's a wild ride.
Okay, so let's unpack the legal battlefield first. The core charge is PQT. What does the prosecution legally need to prove to make this stick, especially, online?
So the charge is based on Article 293 of the Criminal Code, but it's really amplified by this 2013 judicial interpretation that's specifically for the internet. And to get a conviction for spreading false information online, they have to satisfy 4 really stringent conditions. And crucially, they have to do it simultaneously. It's like a 4-legged stool. If you kick out even one of the legs, the whole charge should collapse.
And so 4 crucial hoops. Let's just list them for everyone listening.
First, objective falsehood. The content has to be a fabricated fact. That's too Haitian. Second, subjective intent. The defendant has to know the information is false.
So it's not enough that it's wrong, you have to know it's wrong.
Precisely. Third is simply the act, spreading the content. That's the easy one. And finally, number 4, and this is the most critical, the result. The act has to cause serious chaos in public order.
Right. And Dr. Chen's defense, which, we've read through in these long letters, he systematically attacks those first 2 elements, falsehood and intent. He really leans on his identity as a scholar.
He does. He argues that his work just requires extensive engagement with all sorts of ideas, even contradictory ones. It's the opposite of being a malicious rumor monger.
But the real power of his argument, I think, comes when he tackles that first element, falsehood.
It really does. The prosecution had just bundled together this huge pile of forwarded posts and called them all fabricated facts.
Just a big data dump of guilt.
Basically. So Dr. Chen fought back by actually categorizing the content.
And what were these categories?
He argued the content fell into 4 groups. Art things like satirical cartoons, symbolic images, then subjective emotional expression, then theoretical or academic discussion, and finally a small bit of, debatable historical facts.
And his point was?
His point was that those first 3 groups, art, emotion, and theory, are what you'd call not truth apt. They aren't subject to legal verification.
Can you give us a simple translation of not truth apt? What does that actually mean?
Okay, think of it this way. The PQT law is designed to punish someone who says, I don't know, the local power plant just exploded when it didn't.
Right, because that's a verifiable fact you can check.
It's truth apt. We can send someone to the power plant and see if it's true or false. But then, can you send someone to verify if a poem is false?
Well,
can you measure the objective falsity of a political cartoon? Of course not.
Because they're expressions of a perspective or a feeling, not a claim about the world.
Precisely. So the defense argued that art is symbolic, emotion is subjective, theory is about hypotheses. Since you can't prove them false, they can't legally be rumors or false information. To even try is what philosophers call a semantic category mistake.
It's like trying to weigh a poem on a scale that's designed for bricks.
That's a perfect analogy.
So that's a stunning move. It forces the court to deal with this basic distinction between fact and opinion. Let's pivot to the second element then, intent. If he's claiming these weren't factual lies, how did the prosecution prove he knew they were false?
They really struggled here. His defense was to argue for what he called cognitive humility.
Cognitive humility.
Yeah, he cited people like Plato and Gödel. He basically said, look, as a scholar of complex systems, my whole job is to be skeptical. He claimed he had no capacity to determine the absolute truth or falsehood of everything he forwarded. He was sharing things for discussion, not saying this is the gospel truth.
So he's using his academic identity not just as a character witness, but to actively negate the guilty mind that the law requires.
That's the core of it. But this is what leads us to the most unique part of the whole defense, where Dr. Chen brought his actual physics expertise to bear on that fourth element.
Result.
Did his actions cause serious chaos in public order?
This is where it gets really, really interesting. How on earth do you apply chaos theory to a social media account?
He used his specialty, nonlinear complex systems theory, specifically a concept called self-organized criticality, or SOC.
Okay, you've lost me.
No, think of the classic sand pile analogy. You drop single grains of sand on a pile one by one. For a long, long time, nothing much happens.
Right.
But then eventually, one single final grain of sand triggers a massive system-wide avalanche.
Ah, I see. So SOC is about figuring out when a tiny input can cause a huge nonlinear output.
Exactly. So Dr. Chen argued that the internet and social media is an incredibly robust, complex system. It's like a massive redundant network. And he pointed out his account was a very low-influence edge node.
He had what, fewer than 100 followers?
Fewer than 100 followers, almost zero engagement. Scientifically speaking, he was insignificant.
A tiny grain of sand.
A tiny grain of sand. So applying systems theory, he argued his actions were just a minor perturbation. They were demonstrably insufficient to reach the critical threshold you would need to trigger those avalanche dynamics.
The systemic chaos.
The systemic chaos. He totally flipped the script. Network chaos, he said, is an intrinsic property of the system itself. It's always there. It was not caused by his negligible actions.
That is an incredible way to refute the causal link the law requires. But let me play devil's advocate for a second, because I know someone listening is thinking this.
Go for it.
Even if the effect was tiny, doesn't society have a right to punish people for intentionally posting false stuff, regardless of the chaos? Why can't the court just say, look, you click share, you own it, and we found it destabilizing?
That's a really fair question, and it goes right back to the letter of the law. The PQT crime, when it's applied to online falsehoods, is explicitly a result-based crime. It's not just about the act. It is explicitly about causing serious chaos. Dr. Chen's argument used scientific modeling to show that the result the statute demands was, for him, a scientific impossibility, and the empirical evidence backs him up.
What evidence?
The sources say that after he was released, Dr. Chen observed that the very posts, the criminal evidence, were all still online, undisturbed, unattended.
So if they had caused such serious chaos, why were they still sitting there?
Exactly. It makes the whole claim of serious chaos look like it was just invented to get a conviction.
Okay, so to summarize before we move on, the defense has pretty much dismantled the falsehood claim and the chaos claim. So how did the judiciary get around these really substantial defenses to still get a conviction?
This is where we have to look really closely at the court documents, especially the trial court verdict. It contains this critical logical maneuver. The court had to find a way to establish his subjective intent.
Right, that he knew it was false, even with no evidence.
And their maneuver was what we can only call an identity-based presumption of guilt.
What does that mean?
The court explicitly cited his PhD status. They argued, and this is almost a direct quote, that as a person of high education and knowledge level, he should discern right from wrong. They used his academic success to presume his intent.
Wait. They weaponized his PhD against him. They said, he's smart, therefore he must have known, therefore he's guilty.
That's it.
That's a complete reversal of logic.
It's a logical fallacy, and it's a dangerous legal precedent. It replaces the need for actual evidence with a subjective presumption based on your education. And the verdict is very clear about the real reason. The posts were criminal because they were insulting or attacking the state leadership corps and the current political system.
So the intent they were actually punishing was political criticism, not spreading rumors.
That's what it points to. And this is all compounded by the procedural failures Dr. Chen alleges in his letters.
What are some of the worst examples he cites?
Well, they range from a zero-evidence arrest to claims of violent interrogation to get his passwords. But the most revealing moment, the one that really paints a picture of the judicial environment, happened during the trial itself.
What was that?
Dr. Chen claims he was repeatedly told to shut up, answer yes or no, when he tried to present his scientific and philosophical defense.
Shut up. Answer yes or no. Wow. That quote just. It highlights a complete rejection of rational argument. The court wasn't interested in the reasons he was trying to give.
It was a denial of dialogue. It reduces the trial to a formality. The prosecutor was even quoted saying they didn't intend to verify his claims, they just believed they should be rumors.
An admission of abandoning the duty to prove your case. So what about the appeal? Did the higher court step in and fix any of this?
No, the appellate ruling basically cemented the failure. It acted as what our sources call the final iron gate. The higher court dismissed the appeal, and part of their reasoning was, and this is legally catastrophic, they said Dr. Chen failed to submit new evidence to prove his defense.
That is the textbook definition of a constitutional violation.
It's a clear and critical reversal of the burden of proof. In any fair system, the prosecution has to prove you're guilty. You are not required to prove you're innocent. By demanding he submit new evidence, the court just shredded the principle of innocent until proven guilty.
So after all that, the legal elements, the procedural flaws, let's step back and look at this whole thing through a philosophical lens. What does this case teach us about the nature of law itself?
We can use the framework of two legal giants, H.L.A. Hart and Ronald Dworkin. Let's start with Hart, the legal positivist.
The Hart is all about formal validity, right? Was the law passed correctly?
Correct. So Hart will look at this and say, well, the verdict is formally valid. It is law with a capital L, because the PQT statute was passed according to the recognized legal process, the rule of recognition.
Right.
But Hart was deeply concerned about vague laws. He'd immediately point to the PQT law's extreme ambiguity, what he called its open texture.
That open texture being the blank space in the rule that lets a judge just fill in whatever they want for a specific case.
Exactly, and that ambiguity gives judges massive discretion. And when officials, like the trial court here, use that discretion arbitrarily, treating the rules as just political commands, they lose what Hart called the internal point of view.
The belief in the system.
The belief that the rules are binding. And when that happens, the whole system has a crisis of legitimacy, even if the result is technically still law.
So under Hart's view, it's formally law, but it's a corrupted law. What about Dworkin, who was all about principles?
Dworkin would argue that law isn't just rules on a page, it's rules and underlying principles. And principles, like the fundamental right to free expression, are powerful trumps. They're supposed to override mere policy goals, like maintaining a vaguely defined public order.
And in this case, the court explicitly said their goal was maintaining the political system, and they put that above the scholar's right to inquiry.
They absolutely did. So by failing to prioritize Dr. Chen's fundamental rights, the court completely fails Dworkin's test of finding the best moral interpretation of the law. For Dworkin, this verdict is definitively law, but not justice.
And finally, let's turn to the sharpest critique, the one from contemporary language philosophy. It suggests this whole case is a crisis of meaning and communication.
This analysis says the judicial system committed a kind of semantic violence. Remember how the court just defined art and opinion as false information?
Yeah.
That was step one. A semantic category mistake that twisted the very language of the law to make it fit. They changed the definition to get the outcome they wanted.
They hijacked the dictionary to guarantee a guilty verdict.
You could say that. But the ultimate violation, it circles all the way back to that one procedural moment, the command, shut up.
Right.
This is the judiciary violently monopolizing what's called the space of reasons. They denied the defendant the right to even participate in defining the terms of his own case. What is falsehood? What is chaos? What is intent?
So by using the authoritative language of the verdict, the system just forcibly anchored the vague term picking quarrels onto his actions. They created the identity of criminal through a powerful speech act, not through facts or debate.
It's a performative use of institutional power that weaponizes language itself. The whole trial was structured to block rational inquiry and just substitute it with a political decree.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the tension between formal legal validity, the mechanics of law, and substantive justice, the moral heart of law. What are the key takeaways you, the listener, should hold on to from this case?
I think there are three big ones. First, just remember the fragility of due process. This case really shows the danger of vague pocket statutes like PQT being used to regulate thought, not just action.
Right.
Second, recognize the risk of these identity-based legal presumptions. The bizarre idea that having a PhD somehow proves criminal intent. If the burden of proof can be flipped that easily, then really no one is safe.
And third, and this is my favorite part, appreciate the power of applying other fields like physics, like philosophy, to legal problems. Dr. Chen's use of chaos theory, the philosophical critiques of language, they all fundamentally challenge the internal logic of the verdict itself. They show you where power has overridden reason.
And this leaves us with a provocative final thought, one that's rooted in that language philosophy critique.
Let's hear it.
If a society uses its legal language to systematically confuse subjective opinion and emotion with objective fact, and then denies its citizens the right to even debate the definitions of those terms, does that society risk losing its ability to conduct rational communication entirely? When the law confuses a poem with a verifiable fact, what is left of truth? Think about that as you process this deep dive.